Hey, y'all, and welcome back to our next installment in Countdown to Election Week. Today we have with us Ed Espinoza, Diana Gomez, and Wesley Story. And before we get into the meat of what we're going to talk about, let's start with a little mini icebreaker. So as we all know, especially in Central Texas, it's a little bit chilly outside. Almost feels like from Massachusetts and like it's just getting really cold. And for me, when it's cold, I like to have something nice and warm, usually a pie. And I know, Diana, you're from Kyle, which is the home of the pie in Texas or something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are the pie capital of Texas. And I think I would say my favorite pie is pumpkin pie. Yeah, and it's difficult to have year round. So I would say during the summer, the hotter parts of the year, I have a Frito pie.
Oh, wow. And actually, Ed, Wesley, same question for both of you. What is your favorite pie to have?
Favorite pie? I'm not not really a pie guy. If you want to start the pie cake debate, we could go that road. But in weather like this, I lean towards soup. You know, we had a beef and potato soup last night. There's a place here in town called Soup Peddler. They got a chicken tortilla soup that's amazing. This is Soup Peddler weather.
So you know what? I'm going to put that down as like chicken pot pie.
Okay, that'll work.
Just soup and pie together. What about you, Wesley?
So I like both pie and soup, actually. So I would say my favorite pie is probably apple pie. I'm being pretty basic with that, but with like a nice scoop of ice cream, I think apple pie, you just can't really beat it. I also really like cobbler, which I would say like is in the pie vicinity, so like peach cobbler. But yeah, I would say apple pie. But I also really like soup. I eat soup year round, not just in the winter time.
Wesley, I'd have to agree with you. I'm also an apple pie guy. Strictly McDonald's apple pie, which comes in a little packet. Can't go wrong. So we're going to go from pie to something not as delicious and tasty. Across the country, COVID rates are going up. And you might have seen it, I think, yesterday. The White House declared victory against this pandemic. Ed, what are your thoughts on this revelation from the White House?
My thoughts are that the White House is delusional. That I don't know how they define victory. But given that where they're heading in this election, maybe they need to redefine victory in different ways for different subjects. But there's no way you can define what's happened with the coronavirus in America as a victory. When you look at most other countries in the world, they haven't been hit as hard as we have because they have followed science and medical advice in doing the right thing. And here you have a president who has just flouted all the guidelines, has really led people astray. And then here in Texas with Greg Abbott, Governor COVID, who was against mask orders and really stopped localities from enforcing any kind of issues early on, any sort of safety procedures early on. It's not a victory by any means. We've got a long way to go still on COVID-19, and it's entirely due to the mismanagement of the pandemic.
Yeah, and Wesley and Diana, thinking about COVID, it makes you think about pre-existing conditions in the SCOTUS. How are these things all kind of wrapped up together?
Yeah, so just kind of to your point on the White House declaring victory, I think it's a huge slap in the face to Texans who are dealing with the pandemic right now. Our economy is still in ruins. There are people who are still losing their lives. The hospitalization rates are going up in Texas right now. They're saying the third wave is potentially going to be worse than the first and second. And I think there's an argument to be made about if we ever really were out of the first wave to begin with. I mean, you could really say that this is still the first wave and it's still not been beaten. And so I think that to declare victory is really just to say that you don't care about all the people who are still struggling with this pandemic and struggling with the consequences of the ineptitude. The White House and the people dealing with this pandemic are inept and they haven't been able to beat it. And so just putting that out there as far as my response to that, but also when it comes to pre-existing conditions and the fight that's going on with the Supreme Court, we know that they pushed through a justice who's potentially going to be hostile to our rights, who's potentially going to rule against the ACA, rule to have the ACA repealed. And the ACA right now has a guideline that protects people with pre-existing conditions. And so if the ACA is overturned, then there's a possibility that pre-existing conditions will no longer be protected. And that impacts millions of Americans. It impacts people here in Texas. And the tie-in to COVID is that COVID could potentially become a pre-existing condition down the line, or any of the kind of things that come about because of COVID. We know that it's causing a lot of other health issues as well. Those could potentially become pre-existing conditions. And so it really is all tied in. There's an attack on our healthcare, and it's not just coming from the fact that they're trying to take healthcare and coverage away, but they're also making our the country sicker because of their inability to deal with this pandemic.
Yeah, this victory declaration is just a huge lie in a series of lies. I think with Trump and the GOP leadership in general, they've really banked on just spreading all this misinformation and hoping that there's a following out there that will buy it and vote for them. That's what they've leaned on. They haven't leaned on good policy. They've leaned on lies. And we saw Trump just a few days ago have a tweet storm about COVID. Why is just everyone talking about COVID? This is fake news. And so he's annoyed by it. And so his way of getting rid of a deadly, devastating pandemic that annoys him is just to lie and pretend it doesn't even exist.
You know, it kind of reminds me of another GOP president who declared victory a little bit too early. This
mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah, this is Trump's aircraft carrier moment, right? And then the war ends up lasting years later.
Yeah. So obviously, COVID is very serious. If you're moving around outside, make sure to take all the precautions you can. Obviously, at the voting booths, social distance, wear a mask, keep your hands clean, because we want everyone to go out and vote. But we also want to make sure that people do it very safely. And speaking of voting, Texas is having, knock on wood, so far a pretty good year. Ed, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the new voters that are turning up for the first time here in Texas?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've, previously we talked about the numbers here in Texas, but when you actually look at the people behind the numbers, there was a stat, I don't know what it is today, but yesterday or the day before, 25% of people who had voted so far in the early vote were people who did not vote in 2016, the people who just skipped out.
Yeah.
So, that's when you're looking at increasing the size of your voter pool by what at that point was close to 2 million voters. I mean, that is significant. And when you look at those voters, a third of them were single women. These are all stats that were put out by people who study voter data. They were put up on Twitter. Tom Bonnier from Target Smart was one. Dave Wasserman from the Cook Political Report was another. And it's really remarkable when you look at this. So single women, Latinos are starting to turn out. Our community needs to do a little bit better, but so far we're doing better than we have. And then I know that the young voter numbers have just been monumental with their turnout as well. I know that Wesley or Diana could probably speak to a little bit more to them in depth.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the numbers, the more recent ones that we've seen. There was an article that came out today saying at this point, roughly around 288,000 Texans between 18 and 29 voted in 2016. But right now for us in 2020, we're at more than 800,000 voters between 18 to 29 have voted.
Wow.
So that's a 500,000 increase in voter turnout among voters of that age, which I think is just spectacular and really speaks to the point that young voters, they care a lot about the election. They care a lot about the results of this election. I think for a lot of us, that number is shocking, and it should be surprising, but it should also be, I think for many, it's also not surprising because we know about the work that's been going in the last few years from many different organizations here in Texas. And we know that when young people are actually included in the democratic process and when they're given the tools that they need to participate, then they show up. And that's what's happening right now is we're seeing the fruits of the labor that has been taking place for years. It's been a years-long process. And like I said, with this election in particular, young voters know how much is on the line. They're literally voting to save our lives. They're voting for healthcare. They're voting to save our planet. They're voting for abortion rights, LGBTQ rights, like really any issue you can think of, it's on the ballot this year. And that's why so many young voters are getting out to vote.
So Diana,
Yeah, definitely.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I would just say that a lot of those young voters too are young Latino voters too. It's a really huge block of eligible voters are not just young folks, but Latinos that are turning 18 every day, all the time. And that is such a huge block. Like Wesley was saying, it's, this didn't come out of nowhere. It's been due to a lot of work from a lot of organizations, for example, like Move or Jolt or Texas Rising, just doing a lot of getting out the vote activities to make sure those folks turn out. We still need to keep pushing for our family and friends to go out and vote. There's still a few days left in early voting, and then November 3rd next week. But I think a lot of the reason that Latinos are turning out is because, again, of what Wesley was saying, it's not just candidates on the ballot, it's values. And time again, we see that the most important values that Latinos, that Tejanos care about are things like healthcare, the Affordable Care Act and education. Those are the top things. And those are the top policies that Republicans are failing at right now.
Yeah. So I have one last set of questions for all three of you. And Diana, I'll start with you. So we're trying to win a presidential. We're trying to win a Senate seat, school board of education, Supreme Court of Texas, all the way to the bottom of the ballot. What does it look like if we actually do that this year? What's one thing that you would like to see change if we win up and down the ballot here in Texas?
Oh my gosh, it's hard to pick one thing. There's so many things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think what a lot of people don't realize is, that there's a presidential race, but there's so many other races, and a lot of these races affect your daily life, from your local sheriff and the policies that they enact on who to arrest or not, and what happens after that, and the intersection of that and immigration too. But also, I'll pick a favorite then. I'm going to say State Board of Education, just because I was a Mexican American Studies major in college, and I really wish I would have learned more about Texas's diverse culture and history while I was in public school in Texas, because I didn't. And to have a rich, inclusive, real history of Texas is so important. And we have a chance to flip the State Board of Education with the candidates that we have right now. For Hays County, I'm voting Rebecca Bell Metero. She's so great. She believes in science, sex education. How great would it be to learn about that in public school?
Yeah.
Amazing.
What about you, Wesley?
So the more immediate thing I'm excited about if we win up and down the ballot is just election night specifically. Over the last couple of days, there have been a couple of news organizations that have actually switched Texas from leaning Republican to being a toss-up state. And we posted about this earlier, but just imagine for a second how amazing it would be on election night to go to sleep knowing that Biden secured 38 electoral college votes in Texas, and that there's virtually no path to victory for Trump at that point. And so you can go to sleep on election night knowing that Biden is going to be our presidential king. He's going to win the presidency. And that is something that I am looking forward to if we do end up flipping Texas, because I think a lot of people have a lot of anxieties about election night. And even if we don't know on the night of the election, that's okay. We want to count every single vote and know. But I think that that's something that could ease a lot of the anxieties that people are facing. As far as further down the line and changes that I'm excited to see being made, I think just when it comes to flipping all of these seats, there's a lot that can be done as far as infrastructure in Texas regarding voting rights. And this is an investment really for our future. And so if we put people in office who are actually working to increase voting rights and to actually make it to where people can vote and they're not hostile like the people that we have in office right now, then it means that in future elections, even more people are going to have access to the ballot box. More specifically, if we flip some seats on the Texas Supreme Court, I'm going to be super excited because we know that the Texas Supreme Court has been pretty hostile, and they've really been in line with Governor Abbott with their last few rulings. Yesterday, they ruled that his decision, making it to where there's only one drop-off ballot location in Texas, they sided with him. And so we know that if we get more people on the court who are more friendly to our rights, then we're going to be able to actually have those rights in the future.
Yeah. And Ed, I'm going to give you the final word.
I mean, nothing's bigger than Medicaid expansion. I mean, there's so many things that need to be done in the state, like all the stuff that Diana mentioned, all the stuff that Wesley mentioned, just knowing that if we were able to flip the state at any level, whether it's a Senate seat, a presidential seat, or even just the Texas legislature, knowing that people have a voice, that you have like half of the people in Texas who have not been heard or had a voice for decades are now part of the process, that is tremendous. But as a policy plank, Medicaid expansion, the day it's signed, could help 1 million people in Texas with healthcare coverage. And you still got to have a governor who's going to sign it. But the fact is that you could have a senator or president or a legislative body that is out there fighting for an issue like that would send shockwaves around the state in a good way. Yeah. So that to me is the one that stands out the most. But there are so many more that we could easily talk about as well.
Well, y'all, you heard it here. There's so much that we can do if we flip Texas, even if not at the very top, but the House, the Supreme Court. We can make really big change. It's going to change lots of folks' lives. So remember, early vote is until October 30th. Election day is November 3rd. When you go to vote, make sure that you have hand sanitizer, a mask, social distance. Thanks for joining us today on our episode of Countdown to Election Week. We will see you tomorrow at 12 p.m.